Imagine this. You are on the bridge of the battleship Arizona, the pride of the American Pacific Fleet. You are surrounded by fire, hot metal, and oily water. You hear the sounds of machine guns firing, bombs exploding, the cries of the wounded, and the buzzing of planes. You are gravely injured and your skin is literally peeling off due to burns. You're just a 21-year-old farm boy from Nebraska, but now you're in the fight of your life on one of the worst days in American history, a day in which you will lose most of your shipmates, a day that will live in infamy. Donald Stratton was born on July 14, 1922, to a farmer named Robert J. Stratton and his wife Jessie Ray Rutledge in the small town of Innovale, Nebraska. Donald was the oldest of 4 siblings, 2 younger brothers and 1 younger sister. In the 1930s, the world was engulfed by the Great Depression. This forced Donald and his family to move east to Red Cloud, Nebraska. To add insult to injury, the raging Dust Bowl came in to ruin crops across the Midwest. Despite this, Donald always looked on the bright side. Each year he looked forward to Christmas, and even if it meant he could only get 1 gift, he never complained. Don received gifts that we would take for granted nowadays, such as a coat, boots, and an overshoot for the winter. From 1939 to spring of 1940, Donald played sports, such as football, basketball, baseball, and track. Of those 4, Don said football was his favorite. While he wasn't doing sports, he was doing chores or working. After graduating from high school in May 1940, Don started to look towards his future. It wasn't until a Navy recruiter came to his town and explained that he could earn a steady paycheck that he decided to enlist in the U.S. Navy. Donald was about to go from a small farm in Nebraska to Chicago, Illinois for basic training. Don arrived at the Great Lakes Naval Training Center on Lake Michigan in September 1940. For 6 long weeks, he trained without ever boarding a ship. In mid-October 1940, he arrived in Bremerton, Washington to serve on the USS Arizona, led by Captain Van Valkenburg. At the time, Arizona was in dry dock, and due to rising tensions with Japan, she was undergoing major upgrades. During the refit, a foundation for a search radar was added at the top her foremast, her anti-aircraft directors were upgraded, and a platform for 4 water-cooled 50-inch caliber M2 Browning machine guns were installed at the very top of the main mast. Don was in Bremerton for about 3 months before he was sent to Hawaii aboard Arizona. The trip would last 5 uneventful days. Stratton would later describe Hawaii as magical, specifically remembering the clean and pure air, the peaceful surf lapping against the shore, and the silver moonlight on the harbor. It was during this time that he heard of sailor Joe George, a boxer from the repair ship Vestal. According to Stratton, he was a troublemaker, often getting into arguments with the captain of the Vestal, Casson Young. Stratton would also meet Band Unit No. 22, the Arizona's musical band. A band competition was being held between the ships at Pearl Harbor. The competition continued through the fall and was scheduled to end on December 20th. Arizona's band was lucky enough to advance to the second semifinal to be held on December 6th. Stratton's battle station was just above the bridge. His job was to operate the 5 port-side anti-aircraft guns. His non-combat duties were painting the ship's hull and burning trash. He and shipmate Harl Nelson were the only ones on the ship to do this job. Every battleship was scheduled to undergo an overhaul in Bremerton, Washington, with Arizona scheduled in late November. This meant the crew would be home for Christmas. However, there was soon to be a change of plans. Each week, the Arizona and the rest of the battleships would go out to open sea and practice firing her 4 14-inch gun turrets on maneuvers with the other ships. On October 22, 1941, the USS Arizona was rammed by the USS Oklahoma during a practice session. Somehow, Oklahoma fell out of formation and caused the collision. The Arizona was ordered to stay at Pearl Harbor, while the USS Colorado, the 9th battleship on the Pacific Fleet, went in her place. This unfortunately meant their crew wouldn't be home for Christmas after all. The fleet finally returned to Pearl Harbor on December 5th. On the same day, Harl Nelson came down with jaundice and was urged by Stratton to check into sickbay. The next day, Arizona took in 1.5 million gallons of fuel, a full load, for a trip to Bremerton, a trip which would never occur. A little after 5 a.m. on December 7th, 1941, Stratton awoke and started his normal routine. At 6:30 a.m., he ate breakfast with his shipmates. They fueled themselves with coffee, powdered eggs with ketchup, fried spam, pancakes, and local items like oranges and berries. At 7:55 a.m., the color guard in Arizona's band were about to raise the American flag and play the Star-Spangled Banner, while Stratton was going to give oranges to Harl. It was at this moment that Stratton saw the Japanese attacking Ford Island. The Japanese pilots then began strafing the sailors on Arizona. Stratton would later recall, "A Zero bore down on us, strafing our sailors and splintering our deck. It flew so low I could see the pilot in his leather helmet and goggles taunting me with a smirk and a wave as he passed, like a grinning devil." The general quarters alarm then sounded. "Attention, attention, attention! Man your battle stations! This is no drill! This is no drill!" Everyone did as instructed. Stratton was the first to reach his battle station, followed by Lauren Berner. As he climbed up the ladder, bullets from a Japanese Zero struck Berner in the back of his lower leg. He was followed by Arnold Kuhn, Russell Lott, Earl Reiner, George Howell, Alvin DeVark, Fred Zimmerman, and Frank Lomax. Together, the 9-man team started to defend the ship. Due to the positions of their guns, the men risked friendly fire, so they fired up at the high-altitude bombers at a 90-degree angle. When all the guns ran out of ammo, Frank Lomax, the person in charge of the platform, went to go get some more. According to Stratton, this was the last time he saw Lomax. At 8:06 a.m., the bomb that killed the Arizona struck. A 1,760-pound armor-piercing bomb dropped from a Nakajima B-5N Kate torpedo bomber, piloted by Kani Noboru, struck the Arizona. It went through 4 steel decks to the ammunition magazine. It blew the number 1 turret into the air. The fireball grew to 500 to 600 feet, engulfing the platform that Stratton was on. It lifted the ship out of the water and then slammed her hull back down. Among those killed in the blast were Rear Admiral Isaac C. Kidd, Captain Frank Van Valkenburg, the ship's 21-man band, and thousands of sailors and Marines. The men of Arizona suffered third-degree burns from the explosion. Of the 10 B-5N2 bombers that attacked the Arizona, 5 came from the Japanese carriers Hiryu and Kaga, with Hiryu in particular credited for sinking the Arizona. Stratton would have died on Arizona if it weren't for Joe George. George was ordered to cut the rope connecting the Vestal to the Arizona so the Vestal could safely move away, but George stopped when he saw Stratton and knew he needed help. After 3 tries, George managed to get a line across the 2 ships to act as a bridge. It was at this moment that Captain Young and George got into an argument. Young believed Stratton and the other men didn't stand a chance and demanded George cut the rope. At one point, Young threatened Joe George with a court-martial. Joe George simply replied, "Go ahead and court-martial me then. I'm not going to leave those men to die." Captain Young stormed off, and the men on the Arizona climbed across the rope. The first to cross was Kuhn, followed by Stratton, then the rest. All made it over without any issues. Eventually, Stratton was taken to the Naval Hospital on Oahu. A nurse saw him and determined he was in dire need of help. Stratton reported that there were men crying for a nurse, for their mothers, and for God. Stratton, along with hundreds of other men, were in pain the first night. Some were in so much pain they wished to die. 3 things got them through the night: morphine, sulfa drugs, and plasma. By the next morning, several men in Stratton's section of the hospital had died. Stratton would never forget the cries of the men about to die. They would call for a nurse, then a nurse would come to them and hold their hand until they passed so they wouldn't die alone. One of Stratton's stranger memories was the use of maggots to eat away his dead skin tissue. Maggots only eat dead tissue, which allows for new, healthy tissue to grow. On December 8, 1941, in response to the surprise attack on Pearl Harbor, President Franklin Delano Roosevelt asked Congress to declare war on Japan in what would be known as his Day of Infamy speech. Both the House and Senate declared war on Japan a few hours later, with only one person, Jeannette Rankin of Montana, voting against war with Japan. This would end her political career. In the days that followed, men started to get transferred to the stateside. Stratton would leave Hawaii on December 19th after proving he would make it. On Christmas Day, he reached California, but sadly, one of the men who crossed from the Arizona to the Vestal, Alvin DeVark, died on Christmas Eve. Stratton would stay at Maria Island from December 1941 to September 1942, basically doing rehab. At one point, doctors wanted to amputate his left arm due to the fact that it was healing slowly. Stratton refused, remarking, "I wasn't going to lose anything else. Enough." Stratton would lose 78 pounds while being hospitalized and bedridden for so long. While at the hospital, Stratton followed the news. He learned of the surrender of American forces in the Philippines, the Doolittle Raid, and the Battle of Midway, where 4 Japanese carriers, one of which was the Hiryu, were sunk. In September 1942, Stratton received a medical discharge, but this wouldn't be the end of the war for him just yet. Due to his discharge, Stratton had to hitchhike his way home. When he returned to Red Cloud, some things had changed while others hadn't. Some of the stores had closed and reopened with new owners, while the barber's shop was still open and the opera house was still closed. The town marshal stopped Stratton and offered him a lift to his parents' place. When Stratton returned, his family was beyond grateful that he was alive. Don was informed by his father that another Red Cloud citizen turned sailor, Bill Shannon, was killed on Arizona. Another person from Red Cloud, Vincil Sidlow, went down with his ship, the USS Neches. After over a year at home, Stratton began to talk to his parents about re-enlisting in the U.S. Navy. On February 26, 1944, he went to the draft board in Omaha, Nebraska. At first, he got some resistance from the draft board. They couldn't understand why someone who survived the horrors of the Pearl Harbor attack would want to return to the front lines, as well as their concern that he wouldn't be able to handle the riggings in the heat of battle. By some miracle, the draft board relented and Stratton prevailed. Stratton went to basic training in Farragut, Idaho. In the summer of 1944, he was assigned to the destroyer USS Stack. The Stack's first stop was Pearl Harbor, where Stratton got his first glimpse of the Arizona since he left in December 1941. All the superstructure was gone, cut up for scrap. What remained was a ghost of a ship he once knew. It was also this day that he was awarded the Purple Heart Medal. Stratton participated in the Battle of Leyte Gulf between October 23 to 26, 1944. He also participated in the Battle of Okinawa, giving him the rare distinction of being present for the opening and closing shots of U.S. involvement in World War II. Along with the USS Arizona, 3 battleships were sunk, 2 of which would return to service. 3 others were heavily damaged, and Arizona's sister, the USS Pennsylvania, remained in service. Besides the battleships, 1 AA training ship, the USS Utah, and 3 auxiliaries were sunk. 3 cruisers, 4 destroyers, and 2 auxiliaries were damaged. 188 aircraft were destroyed, and 159 were damaged. Along with the military casualties of 2,335 killed and 1,143 wounded, there were 68 civilians killed, 35 wounded, and 3 civilian aircraft were shot down. The band competition mentioned earlier was never held for obvious reasons. Instead, all the bands of the Pacific Fleet voted on who should win the trophy. The vote was unanimous. The Band 22 of the USS Arizona, who were all killed in action, were awarded what would later be known as the Arizona Trophy. The USS Arizona still sits at the bottom of Pearl Harbor with over 900 men entombed inside. The Arizona Memorial was built in 1962 and dedicated on May 30th of the same year. The memorial sits above the sunken Arizona, straddling the hull without touching it. The memorial features an opening in the floor so that visitors may toss flowers into the water in honor of the fallen sailors and Marines. Behind velvet ropes stands a marble wall inscribed with the names of the men killed on the Arizona. To the left of the wall is a small plaque inscribed with the names of the survivors. Arizona survivors often choose to have their ashes scattered in the water over the ship or have their urns placed within the well of the barbette of turret number 4. The USS Arizona still leaks oil, which are called the Tears of the Arizona. A common myth is that the oil will stop when the last survivor dies. However, the National Park Service, which maintains the Arizona, estimates that the oil will continue to leak for 500 years at its current rate. In honor of the men who died on the ship, every time a U.S. Navy ship passes the Arizona Memorial, their crew man the rails and give the Arizona a salute. More recently, 4 navies have participated in this tradition. The USS Missouri, the last battleship completed by the U.S. in the site of the Japanese surrender in World War II, now sits facing the Arizona to guard those interred within the Arizona's hull so they may rest in peace. Some regard the attack on Pearl Harbor and the death of the Arizona as the end of the battleship era, due to the fact that after the events of Pearl Harbor, the main ship type to carry on the fight was the aircraft carrier. After World War II, battleships fought in a few more wars before being considered outdated by the end of the 20th century and have no place in a modern navy. No battleships have been seen in service in the 21st century. As for Stratton, he survived the war and returned home to Red Cloud. He would fall in love with a girl named Velma Detty Lockhart and married her in 1950. Their marriage would last 69 years and saw the birth of 2 sons and daughters. However, both daughters died within days of being born. On December 7, 1966, Stratton would visit the Arizona Memorial with his wife and sons. The experience was a cocktail of emotions for Stratton, mostly sorrow and anger. I was angry at the politicians, at the military leaders, at the officers on my own ship, angry at the enemy. I was even angry that day with some of the visitors, especially one of them, Mitsuo Fujita, Captain Mitsuo Fujita. Captain Mitsuo Fujita was in charge of the first wave of attacks on Pearl Harbor. After the war, Fujita became a Christian missionary. He traveled to the United States to give his testimony and conversion, planning to make Honolulu his last stop. Fujita, alongside some surviving Japanese pilots from the war, was hoping to take a group photo with Pearl Harbor survivors as an act of reconciliation. However, many of the Pearl Harbor survivors refused. Stratton described Fujita's presence at Pearl Harbor as sacrilege and a desecration. When asked if he would join in the photo, Stratton refused. "There's no way I'm going to shake their hands, and I know 1,000 other men who wouldn't either." As a man of faith, Stratton acknowledged the wisdom of the Bible. Love your enemies, bless those who curse you, do good to those who hate you, pray for those who mistreat you and persecute you. Despite his beliefs, Stratton had difficulty forgiving Fujita and the men responsible for the attack on Pearl Harbor. A part of me wishes I could. Another part wants to take the stand to testify on behalf of those whose voices were silenced by the unconscionable trespass against us. Before I left the memorial that December day in 1966, I stood at the railing, staring at the water, watching a black tear make its way to the surface, where it dispersed into a rainbow of colors that caught the sun. I said a prayer for the gallant men entombed there, and a prayer for their families, but not for Fujita. 50 years have passed, so had Fujita. When I go to the 75th anniversary, will the Lord grant me the grace to do what I could not do for the past 3/4 of a century? On November 22, 2016, Stratton published his memoir, All the Gallant Men, recounting his experiences at Pearl Harbor. Stratton was determined to tell his story, as well as the story of the men who could no longer speak for themselves, as to not be forgotten. Stratton and many others advocated for Joe George to receive the Medal of Honor for his heroic actions at Pearl Harbor. While the window was still open, George would not receive the Medal of Honor in Stratton's lifetime, but was posthumously awarded the Bronze Star in 2018. Stratton, George's daughter, Joan Taylor, and Lauren Berner were all in attendance. In October 2019, Stratton contracted pneumonia. He has been in poor health ever since and died in his sleep on February 15, 2020. His wife, Velma, and their surviving son, Randy, were by his side until the end. Like many of the Arizona survivors, he was given the chance to be cremated and have his ashes entombed inside the USS Arizona. Stratton turned down the offer, saying, "I've been cremated once. I don't need to be cremated twice." Don Stratton was laid to rest beside his parents in Red Cloud, Nebraska on March 2, 2020, with full military honors. Don Stratton was the third to last survivor of the USS Arizona. At the time of writing, Ken Potts and Lewis Conter are the last 2 to survive the Arizona sinking. In his book, Don Stratton mentioned a prayer written by Eleanor Roosevelt. "Dear Lord, lest I continue in my complacent ways, help me to remember that somewhere someone died for me today. And if there be a war, help me to remember to ask, am I worth dying for?" Stratton elaborated his thoughts on Eleanor's prayer in his book. "A man died for me today. 2,403 men perished at Pearl Harbor, 1,177 from the Arizona alone. Each of those individuals had a name, all of which are on display in the solemn shrine that stands above the ship. This is what freedom costs, and these men are the men who helped pay for it, giving up their dreams so we could have a future, sacrificing their lives so we could live. Of all the questions we could ask of God in times of war, there is one we should not direct to Him, but to ourselves. Am I worth dying for? Am I worth the sacrifice of who they were or someday would become? I've reflected on this question every day since December 7th, 1941. Stratton suffered from survivor's guilt. He couldn't help but ask why he survived and others have not. He admitted he wasn't sure how to understand or deal with his guilt. Even though Stratton said he never understood why he was saved, he found comfort in his faith. I just say a prayer of thanks for me, who made it, and a prayer of blessing for those who didn't, and one for the families they left behind. It's the best I can do. One quote that Stratton came across helped him when he felt he hasn't done enough. Do the best you can, with what you've got. It will be enough.